Is it recording?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I see it.
All
There.
right, here we are on The Blind Man in Black. And I am so excited to introduce Juli Crockett, the lead singer of Evangenitals. You have a Ph.D., you are a boxer, a
Yes.
theater artist. You're an apocalyptic Renaissance woman. Is that fair to say?
That sounds about accurate.
Awesome.
That's certainly what it feels like.
How are you holding together, by the way?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Which I think brings with it its own kind of survivor's guilt, I've discovered, where I think for some of us, some of us maybe that have more introverted, bits of us that we haven't been tending to because of the demands of life, that this feels like a moment where the universe has given me permission to like slow down and get super introspective. In that said, with the fact that like I've been still working full time and being a mom and having to do homeschool, but it's still been an opportunity to like slow down and be introspective even in the midst of all that.
So tell me, what have you discovered in this introspective state?
Well, I think that collectively, and I'll go back because I think there was this amazing period of time, and I think, and much of me feels like it's already been squandered, but there was this amazing moment, it felt like, in early pandemic, when everything really seemed to stop for a couple weeks. And here in LA, it was kind of amplified in a certain way because suddenly there was no traffic and the air was super clean and everything just really paused, it felt like, at least from my tiny little privileged bubble. And it was this amazing glimpse of like, we can do this, like we can stop. We could stop anytime we wanted to. We could just stop the blind, lemming-like hurtling off the cliff of, the Industrial Revolution. We could just be like, nah, we're gonna chill. We're gonna stay home. We're gonna spend more time with our families. We're gonna go for walks. We're not gonna drive so much. And it was, I think, like simultaneously and paradoxically super depressing, but also really encouraging, because I think for those of us who are kind of on a more, I don't know what you call it, like spiritualist bent or whatever, it's this knowledge that like awakening happens in an instant, like transformation happens in an instant, and that we collectively as a people could wake up instantaneously and change everything. And so that gives me a weird kind of optimism, because it kind of helps to counteract the doom and gloom of like, oh, it's too late and we're all just on this horrible slide to doom and despair. But back to the original question, what has the introspective part made me say, is I think it's really put me in a deeply philosophical state of mind where it gave just enough space to really start asking those kind of bone crunching questions of like, what are you doing with your life? Like, what are you doing with your time on this earth? And having, people impacted by this, seeing people die, going through that experience, I think it really amplifies those questions of like, oh, right, there is no guarantee. We have no idea how much time we have. So it really amplifies the preciousness of what are we doing with our time on the planet.
Speaking of preciousness, I had precious memories. I think we should let our listeners know that you and I met at CalArts somewhere around I'm going to say 1996 or 90, no, 98.
Yeah, 98, 99, 2000. Yeah, the 2001, that was the span.
Yeah. And I was in your Moby Dick. I was deep in your Moby Dick.
You were so deep. In fact, you were the deepest, technically, being the one.
Right. And
in the deep sea diver suit, you were as deep as it gets.
now, help me remember, because what I remember is I was in the Richard Foreman project.
Yeah.
And what happened and I don't think you knew this, but I was in the first rehearsal with them, and there was a light that was pointed at eye level from the audience. And we were supposed to run around. It was right in our faces. And we were running around the stage. He was asking us to run around the stage. And I just got so scared because I was losing my eyesight. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this, if this is what it's going to be like, light in my face, and I'm having to run around people and all this shit. And so I just quit. And I didn't explain why. I just said, I quit. And I was just like, this is not for me, and that wasn't the truth. I was lying to myself and anybody I talked with. But the truth is I was scared to express that I was losing my eyesight. And in retrospect, when I think about it, had I told him from the beginning, I think he would have embraced it and used it in the show, because it was experimental. There was no script. There wasn't a requirement that I had able-bodied eyes. But what I remember is after that, you cast me in Moby Dick or The Whale, correct?
I think so. I mean, my memories are real blurry of my entire CalArts experience, and especially right around that time.
Well, what I'm asking though is, did I tell you that I was losing my eyesight? Because I feel like it's somehow you did, because I played the deep. What was my character's name?
I think it was the Sea Dog. You were the Sea Dog.
Right, but I was the deep sea dog, because I was the only one.
Yeah, there was
wearing...
like the sea dogs, and then there was, I don't even remember. I'm sure if I found an old script, I could see what I actually called that thing.
There were other ones, but I was the one with the old-fashioned deep diving suit, like the globe with the circular
with the
grated
mic inside of it, which was great.
Yeah, and I remember one of my lines was, "This is this, and this is it." Yes. It's funny, but Aaron Shiver, our mutual friend who was on Boardwalk Empire, by the way, he actually used that in his email, like in his signature line. "This is this, and this is it."
Well, yeah. To be fair, I technically got "this is this" from the Deer Hunter.
Oh, okay.
But
Deer Hunter, Moby Dick, same thing.
Same thing, exactly. I mean, we're all of art is one long conversation. We're all just referencing each other and continuing a really long monologue, I think. But I'm trying to remember if I knew, because there is something resonant about that it would have made sense if you had shared that with me, that I would put you in a dark suit and been like, cool.
Well, I feel like that's the reason I was on the swing for the entire show and moving, and I moved very slow, and rather than running around the grid.
Yeah, with the flippers and up on the grid. Yeah.
Yeah. And I appreciated that. I thank you for allowing me to participate and finding another way to incorporate me. And that it was fun. It was really a lot of fun. So thank you.
Yeah. That piece, it's amazing because I had the opportunity. So Peter Cassander from CalArts, who was the lighting designer for that show, has gone on he's up in Oregon now, up in Portland, Oregon, and he works with an experimental theater company called Pete, the Portland Experimental Theater Ensemble. And they actually, a few years ago, did a production of Or the Whale. And it was amazing because as a person who writes and directs my own stuff, it's all, very insular. So it was incredible to see somebody else direct the piece to be like, you do it. And it was great. And there were certain things, like they had a deep sea diver, but really kind of broke it apart and did things in their own way, which was amazing. And then actually another theater company out in by Boston called Imaginary Beasts, they ended up doing a production of it. And then I got to fly out to Boston and go see, just because I was so curious to be like, that's part of the joy. Because when I actually published that play through a wonderful publishing company called Deliri Press that's out of Singapore, that was somebody who I met at my PhD school in Switzerland, runs that publishing company. So so there's like a beautiful thing. It got published, and it was done with illustrations by an artist from Singapore named Ivy Maya. And when I published it, I just published it as text, and there's no delineation of character or explanation how to stage it. It just is like, well, here's the text and you get to do what you want. And I've done it with 4 people, and I've done it with 20 people, so have fun. So it's so fun seeing what other people do with it, and that it has that kind of freedom, and that I've discovered so many things about the piece seeing their productions of it and going like, oh yeah, that's amazing. Because I think I feel like as an artist a lot, like in some ways I feel like I'm the last person. I'd like to know what it is that I'm doing, because I'm just kind of doing what I'm doing. And then a lot of times when you see it reflected back, then you start figuring out like, oh yeah, that's what's going on there. That's amazing.
That is amazing that it's gone so many places, but what made you explore that piece? Because I'm thinking about it right now, and I'm like, this has like some deep shit for me, because I'm like, Moby, Captain Ahab, wants revenge for the loss of his leg. And it's that, bottomless pit of seeking that. And then like, I'm going through my own loss of eyesight and hearing. And I'm like, I'm angry, but I don't have any whale to blame.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Well, I think in my approach to it, is that it's really about whale or no whale, how we deal with loss, like right. That's what it's about, is like, yeah. What do you do when you're dealing with losing something you had, or absence, or even wanting something that you don't have, like anything that, and that's kind of it's funny because that's kind of the entire thing. My dissertation for my PhD was called Void Creation, and it's all about that. It's about the gap, and it's about the nothingness that we constantly are creating. That in effect, when we make a piece of art, what we're creating is this distance and this absence around it, where we get to engage with it, but that we're constantly grappling with loss or distance or disconnection. I think it manifests in a lot of ways, and you can go super biblical with that, because Moby Dick too is beautiful in that it goes from like the biblical to the Shakespearean to the philosophical, to it has all these modes in it. And from a biblical lens, people talk about all of our pain,
to a corporate lens as well, because Starbucks. There you go.
Right? Yeah, they just took that, and those are everywhere now. Yeah. But it was funny. It's a funny story, because part of it was, I think one of the things, honestly, in a very small way, what I connected with is when I was at Cal Arts. From the time I got there, I talked about this piece I was going to make about Moby Dick. And I remember talking to Travis about it. And then whenever they'd ask me, like, what do you want to do for your thesis? I was like, oh, I'm going to make this piece about Moby Dick. Fun fact, I had never read Moby Dick. Like I talked about it for 3 years and
Did you watch the movie at least? Because that's what I used to do in high school. Just watch the movie and then write the book report.
No, I hadn't watched the movie. I hadn't read the book. Back when I was at NYU in my undergrad, I had a boyfriend, and he was taking a literature class, and he read Moby Dick, and he would tell me.
Was it Philip Seymour Hoffman?
My boyfriend? No.
Oh, okay.
that'd be crazy. His name was Gordon.
Okay.
He had read the book, and he would tell me stories from the book. And I actually, the very first song I ever wrote back then was this song called Queequeg, that was just written by kind of like the dreamlike threads of what I imagined from the stories he would tell me about the book that he actually read, because he'd tell me these little stories and I would just take these threads. And then I had and then it was funny because I was actually, then when I was in LA and I started going to Cal Arts, we lived in the brewery for a while, and I downtown, and I was trying to turn my house. We had this bedroom that was at the top of like a little crow's nest, and I was trying to turn it into a pirate ship with like rope and stuff. And I was listening to Ween. I was listening to their album, The Mollusk. And I was like, somebody should make an opera about pirates. and then I turned around and looked at the bookshelf, and Moby Dick was there. And I was like, somebody needs to make an opera about Moby Dick. and then that's why I was like, I want to do that. And so a lot of it was, that. And then I got approved to do it. So I was like, well, hot damn, I better read that book and write a play, because now I got to do it. So the first time, I mean, I read it, which was wild because I read it, relatively quickly. And then I read it again, and then I would be like reading it and writing on it. And I think, I mean, ultimately it's like a lot of the work that I've done is because I think I'm so experimental. Like I kind of go so far out riffing on something, is it's like a jazz song where you have to have the standard so that you can improvise, so that you can go kind of on this far out journey. But there is an anchor, and there's a ground that's kind of like a cultural, it's like a myth. And so using these great works of literature, even if a person hasn't read Moby Dick, they tend to know, oh, right, it's about Ahab and man's, whatever quest for vengeance. Like they have some fundamental cultural, grounding to engage with this piece. And it's really all you need. And I think that's where, when I think about like Shakespeare's plays, where you have these like highfalutin intellectuals who are going to engage with it way up here, but then you had like the common plebeians who are like, this is funny, or like, oh my God, this is dramatic, where you kind of have these different access points. And that's in some ways always what I'm going for, is it's like, you should be able to just meet this piece wherever you're at and not feel like it. And then if you want to get super, super critical engaged with it, you'll be satisfied, and there's lots to find there. But if you just also want to look at it and be like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's fine.
And it was beautiful. I remember it very well. Have you thought about like directing a show and not like based on a novel and not reading the novel?
Like, you mean actually directing the piece without reading its source material?
Exactly.
Well, I think, I don't know. I mean, that would be pretty funny. I mean,
yeah,
I think,
I think it would be fun because I know it would be wonderful no matter what you did with it. And it would be just interesting to see how it played out. I mean,
I remember seeing like some line it was funny. I saw an interview that was talking about the new Cats movie that was made. And evidently it was Taylor Swift's dad who suggested the catnip scene. And the director was like, what's catnip? And I was so like blown away. I loved it so much. I was like, I love that this director is directing the effing movie of Cats and doesn't know what catnip is. Like he clearly is not really engaged with the cat culture too much if he doesn't know that. But I think that there's like I mean, it's interesting because I realize I really get off on dramaturgy because it like almost as a mystical practice, not because I think that it's like, oh, this is the truth, but it's just that it gives so much food, and in some ways like justification and validation for my weirdness, where it's like I can think of it's kind of like, what do they call it, confirmation bias. Like I can think of the most absurd thing that I want to do and then absolutely justify it dramaturgically. Like in retrospect, like I will do some ridiculous gesture and then go back and be like, oh my gosh, that absolutely corresponds to this like factual thing or whatever historical thing about that person or where they live. I mean, it's weird because but I think it's not. I mean, if you're into like Jung and collective unconscious and the fact that we're all telling the same story over and over and over again.
Feels like it.
Yeah. like
I feel like I'm telling my same story over and over again. So collectively that would make sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is funny because I do think it's a weird like belief or faith that we have in art. Like I realize there's a part of me that believes that like if you could write the perfect sentence, or if you could describe something in like the ultimate way, that like the universe would just unlock. That something would just transform and suddenly we could fly, like where it does feel like there's like a something compelling this process to be like, I just want to accurately reflect my insides on the outside. I think that's what it is. I mean, I know for me, that's always been the challenge of, I mean, Travis and I used to talk about this all the time.
And she's talking about Travis Preston, the experimental theater director.
Yes, I am. And like one of the fundamental relationships of my life. I mean, he loves to point that out. Like he was my teacher at NYU. So Travis has known me since I was 17 years old, which is crazy. And we still, I mean, he still is my mentor or whatever, peer, friend, human. But that's what we talked about a lot, is like one of the big challenges for my theater art was that everything I'm trying to dramatize is thinking and feeling. Like that's all I care about. Like It's never about, oh, this narrative thing of this person did this and that. It's all like, what does it feel like to have an idea? What does it feel like to, lose some, like how do you process, these feelings, and trying to articulate that and trying to dramatize that, because that's, for me, like that's where I spend most of my time. It's like that is the lens through which my life is lived.
That's fascinating, because I think about that a lot. I feel like I don't remember many things, but what I do remember is feelings.
Yeah.
Very well. And I don't even know how to express what that means.
No, I mean, there's some truism or statement I've heard that's like, yeah, we don't remember what people do or the specific events, but we remember how people made us feel, and for better and for worse. Like that there's these, it's weird when you have these traumatic memories of childhood, and it's like being embarrassed or being shamed or being, or winning something, whatever it is, but it's all these on the level of like affects and intensities and stuff, where it's not, it like my brain, it takes a long time to organize, like, okay, where was I and what did the room look like and what actually, happened, as opposed to, just these surges of feeling and emotion. And I mean, I think it's we live in a time, and we have for a long time, where like rationality and logic is really preeminent over like emotional affect playing.
Categorizing and compartmentalizing.
And how we assign value to things, and that we don't really assign a lot of value to like lived experience. Like our ways of measuring things are really externalized, and it's not measured by what are the quality of your relationships and how much inner peace do you have, and how many, you know, deep love affairs have you, like, you know, how many pieces of literature have you fallen in love with this week? Or what sentences are you courting at the moment?
What's your
You
stock
know?
portfolio right now?
Right. It's really odd. And I think that's some of what is brutal for artists, like, trying to exist, is that there's like this real I don't even know, I get so flummoxed by trying to justify the value of the thing that you do, because I remember joking with my husband one time, it's like, as an individual artist, it's like you're working in there's zero demand for my art. Like nobody's like, come on, you gotta do it, but there's so much need that you feel is there, and whether that's, I mean, it's just always been the shit of, like, I think that's really something we struggle with, is like, is it selfish, is it childish, is it, you know, unrealistic, is it because it just operates in a entirely different plane of value than what we see when we look at the news or read the paper, and then to be, I mean, I've been going through this lately myself, because I always feel this pull of, like, when you feel like some measure of being a successful artist is making money off of your art. But when I look at every artist whose work I admire, they never fucking made money off their art.
Right.
They never did, because
Right.
their art was always, and in fact, like, generally, if you're going through that purist lens of, like, art, it's like, most of the time, if you're making money on your art, that's not art. Like, that's not art. You're making great entertainment, you're doing, you know, this and that, but it's like, I think history shows us that you know, the real art that changes and challenges is never anything that people want at the moment. They're like, don't show me that.
Right.
So
They want the next thing that can be binge watched.
Yes, exactly. Well, and that's because that's what we understand. I mean, it's like the great obsession of the West is like, how do I commodify this? You know, so even there's a great.
I like that impression of that spirit of whatever that is. How do I commodify?
How do I do it, guy? No, I need a cigar. It's that guy. It's that guy. It's like, okay, boys, like, we need a logo. Stat. Let's go. I think there's Donald Barthelme, who was like a critic and writer that I love, had something where he was like, yeah, it takes approximately 45 minutes for the greatest new piece of art to make it, like, from its debut to the window at Macy's, you know? So it's just like, whatever, we just, as soon as it comes out, you're just like, the machine just eats it. And it's like, how do we mass produce this? How do I put it on a coffee cup? How do I do it? And then it's weird, because as a creative person who wants to, like, survive in the world and have more time to be creative, I think I become desirous of that, where you're like, how do I get my art on a fucking coffee cup? Like, how do I do it? You know, so that I can live.
How do you deal? I mean, because those conversations drive me up the wall. Like those things where, like, what's your brand?
Well,
you know, I hate that fucking term. What's your brand?
Well, it's horrible.
Because if you think about the origins of it.
Right? I was just having that conversation with somebody where I'm like, how did we get duped into, I mean, because it's my whole, you know, fucking the gig economy and all this stuff of, like, be an Uber driver and you have the liberation of being your own boss, and you're like, what?
Yeah,
like, that's
the
insane.
Illusion of liberation.
Right?
Yeah.
And like, what has happened to the models? I mean, it's funny because I've been thinking a lot about labor unions lately, because I'm like, we really did a great job just making them evil, you know, and thinking like, this is the worst, and the labor unions. And I'm like, that is so much oh, it's a complex situation. But, you know, when you look at everything we take for granted and love about whatever, you know, protections we have in employment, from the 8-hour workday to breaks to whatever, you're like, thanks, labor unions. But
Right.
then, you know, with we entered into this incredible indoctrination and propaganda phase about being an entrepreneur and being your own boss and being in charge and being an individual, that we've been rendered so powerless and alone because we have no institutional support anymore. So that now I, as an individual artist, am supposed to be my own marketing department, my own booking agent, my own branding person. And that, like, the insult, it's funny because I feel lately like I so desperately, when I imagine like, oh, what do I really want to be doing right now? You know, it's like, you think about writing and you're like, I want to be a writer. But I don't want to be a writer in any sense of the modern like thing, because it's like, when you see the package now of like, to be a successful writer, where, okay, well then you got to get on Instagram and you have to promote yourself because you have to be the brand and you have to make little like videos of yourself, where it's interesting because it's like the sacrifice of the personal and like the sacrifice of privacy, both in the weird, you know, data mining internet world that we live in, where it's a given that you're just going to give away all your personal information so you can be more effectively marketed to, and that we welcome that. It's crazy. I think about the dead Kennedys and like death by convenience, where you're like, they were literally saying this in the 80s, like before the internet took hold, that we were going to give away everything just so we'd be like, it's amazing that Netflix knows the next movie I'd like to watch. And it's like,
Aldous Huxley did the same thing. What he wrote about our, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, we are going to enjoy our pharmaceutical, like, I can't remember. It was like the idea of that we would embrace being hypnotized by drugs, and
we love it. And
yeah.
It's crazy because you go back, I mean, Jesus, you go back to like the Society of the Spectacle, and you're like, it's so depressing. Like when you go back and read Marx and you're like, somebody already articulated this really well and it didn't do shit. And that kind of makes you, I mean, that's where it's like, oh God, like what's it going to take? What's it going to take?
Yeah, it's really been a war of marketing for centuries, just like trying to, I remember reading about how Los Angeles was created, the idea that, you know, it was marketed as this utopia where you could be cured of any disease, and oranges grew on Joshua trees, and a lot of bullshit, right?
Yes.
And now look at it.
And it's insane. It's funny. I was just reading Mike Davis's Ecology of Fear, when we are in this era of, you know, all these wildfires, and you just realize how that, like, the money and the developers and created a death trap, you know, that is Southern California, and where we build things where you shouldn't build things. And part of that, I you know, and it's one of those things where when I can pull back the camera to, like, you know, a galactic view of us as funny little monkeys running around doing our thing, there is kind of this like, oh, you're like, we're, you know, because it's that same thrust that makes us build planes and, you know, do all these crazy things that are impossible, or, you know, send people to the moon. And, you know, it's this limitless thought of, you know, our omnipotentiality, and that we're gonna overcome every obstacle, be it age or death or pain or sickness or, you know, building things on a mudslide prone fire hazard and be like, I'm gonna build a giant mansion here and then it's gonna fall down and then we're gonna build it again. You know, it's like, it's so crazy, which I love about humanity, and, you know, and despair about humanity, is just how wonderfully misguided and amnesic we are. Like that we just don't learn from any of it. We just keep, I mean, again, like the same story told over and over and over again. It's like, because we have no memory. We have no cultural memory. We have no historical memory. And we think that we're so different all the time. We're just like, yeah, but not me. Not me, I'm different.
Do you remember Norman Klein at Cal Arts?
No.
He wrote a book called The History of Forgetting.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yes.
Exactly.
Well, it is. Yeah.
I want to rewind just a little bit.
Yeah.
You mentioned traumatic memories of childhood. Let's go back there.
Great.
What happened there?
Well,
I want to go more uplifting, but let's start here.
Well, it's funny. I just realized, because I've been doing, that's one of the things. I've been doing a lot of work. I love all the things. I love balancing like philosophical outward looking with intense navel gazing or inward work. I think it's a great paradoxical pull. But I recently, and I've been through years of, therapy and whatever, all kinds of things. And I had never articulated until literally a few weeks ago. Is this an exclusive? This is an exclusive. Well, yeah, I don't think I've talked about this like in any public way before. But I recently, I was having a conversation with my child and my husband. And my husband was sharing about like walking to school and then how he would walk to school, I think it was, or walk home from school in order to avoid bullies on the bus. And then somehow in this conversation, I had never put together the fact that kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade, I went to a different school every year. And it was just kind of this moment of like, oh, because my husband alternatively went to the same, like lived in the same town, knew the same people, was raised with the same children, had these long friendships. And then it was this realization, like I moved a lot as a child. I went to all these different schools. So part of it was, what was that about? What did you do at those schools that you had to move every year? I mean, it was funny because it was just like random stuff. Like I went to this really idyllic kindergarten in Alabama that was like out in blueberry fields in a standalone place. And I have all these like great memories of this, weird outside of time, kindergarten in the blueberry fields of Alabama. And then, first grade, that's kind of a normal shift. We shifted there, but then somewhere, I think it was maybe in the middle of second grade, I can't remember, but we moved to Florida. It was just, by the way, that's a great title for a song, Blueberry Fields of Alabama. The Blueberry Fields, totally. And then we moved to Florida, but we lived in Tampa for the first thing. So I went to one school and then we moved to a different part, but I went to a school near my grandfather's house, and then we moved into our house and I went to a different fourth grade. And then I transferred to a different fifth grade, I think, so that, my mom probably transferred me so I could be in the gifted program or whatever, because they started it at one school. So, and it was funny because I was talking to my mom about this the other day, because like she had a traumatic move when she was young and never wanted to move her family around, but then was like, and then I ended up doing it. And that's crazy that was never her intent, but it's just kind of the way that life happened. And it is weird because like, yeah, when I talk about how many places I've lived, a lot of people are like, were you in the military? Like, why would you move so much? But it was just, I think it was important to my mom to get us out of Alabama was part of it. It was like, get out. But then we went to Florida, which isn't much better, folks, I'm going to tell you. And then, and then there was a divorce. And wait a minute. Why does everybody not like Florida? Everybody that I've talked to has lived there or experienced Florida. I haven't been there, but what's the deal with Florida? Well, I think Florida, depending on what part you're in, is, I mean, the way that I always assessed it is I think that Florida's biggest problem is it thinks that it is not part of the South. So in that denial of the fact that it absolutely is part of the South, and especially, I mean, it gets kind of gradiently worse as you go north, or I think so they kind of exempt themselves from thinking that they have some of these problems of the South. And so so there's that, but I also think it's just it's a very convoluted place. So you have kind of all of this, like, I mean, you have you have this influence from, you know, Cuba and Miami, and this really vibrant cultural down south of it. But then you have, like, you know, international retirees in this senior citizen population. Yeah, you have, you know, weird Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, all these people who go to have their money in their weird, you know, tropical
ice white shut parties.
Yeah, like there's that weirdness, and then there's, like, you know, there's a Native American population and the Seminole Indians, and then there's, like, you know, the Disneyland quotient and weird, it's just there, it's such a world of competing oddness that seems really incoherent. I mean, I was like one of the things when I grew up, I lived in St. Pete, and I used to volunteer in, like, junior docent at the Salvador Dali Museum, which is insane to think that the Salvador Dali Museum is in Florida. So I had to be like, what? So it is odd, because there's these amazing, you know, cultural pockets and really interesting communities. And then there's, like, you know, Scientology has taken over Clearwater, and then there's, I mean, it's you mean
like kind of like a retreat type thing?
No, like the whole city, like they own everything. It's like a mecca.
So is that their East Coast, South?
I guess. Yeah, I mean, it's super weird. It's just super weird. I think it's one of those, like, it's one of those places where you just don't know where you are, you know, where it's like it's like Gertrude Stein, when it's like there's no there, you're just like, what is happening? What is happening?
So it's like the beyond part of Bed Bath and Beyond.
Yes.
Nebulous.
Yes. It's like the door you opened, and you're just like, it's all things at all time. It's like when they talk about, like, theories of time where everything is happening all at once, like multidimensionally. It's like that's kind of Florida, which is
it makes everybody very uncomfortable, obviously.
I think so. I mean, I think it's, or that everybody's, like, trying to, I mean, I mean, that feels like what's going on in the world right now, where it's like everybody's trying to defend their take on reality. Like, everybody's like, no, it's like this. Where I used to love in I think it's Yoruba mythology, in the African Yoruba mythology, there's the character, which, I mean, is in a lot of Native American things too, but it's like Eshu, I think his name was, the trickster, which is like one of the, you know, demon or devil things, and the thing with Eshu was, like, he would wear an outfit where on one side it's black and on one side it's red. So when he would walk between two people, they would argue whether he was red or he was black, you know, to be like, no, he was wearing a black suit. And the other guy would be like, no, he's wearing a red suit. And it's like, they're
dividing
both right.
and conquering.
Yes. And but that was his joy, was, like, seeding this discord and I think that's, you know, just what we're living in right now.
Repeating the same cycle over again.
Yeah.
So what else happened?
What else happened in my
in the early years? I'm going to say the early years.
Well,
what can you think of an event that defined you, the person that you are today, or
is there an event? I mean, it's very odd, because, I mean, it's weird when I try to think. I mean, I was the youngest kid. I have a brother and a sister, and I was the youngest. And I was, you know, kind of, like, terrorized by my brother and my sister. and we had an incredibly like, I mean, I was in a family, honestly, I was in a family where everybody was an artist, you know, where it's like and everybody was crazy. I mean, that was like the thing. We had this incredibly emotionally volatile upbringing where my father was a writer, and then my mother was a writer. My sister was like an amazing sculptor, an artist. My brother was a visual artist, and I was like a weird theater kid. And it was just, we just were constantly like fighting and emotional. Just like everything just felt insane. So I think that you know, and it was like one of the things I think you know, one of my early inclinations I realized was that I would make I made secret spaces like inside my house. So in one of my bedrooms, there was like a bookshelf in the wall, and then there was stairs up to the attic. And I actually cut the bottom shelf, the wall, out of the bookshelf so I could crawl through it. And I had a little widget, you know, where I would like be able to put the shelf back up and hide under the stairs, and like built and made my whole little like secret room under the stairs.
How did your parents react to that?
They didn't know until we were moving and selling the house, and then they were super mad when we were like about to sell the house, and they're like, "Why is there a hole in the thing?" I was like, "Oh,
we just lost like $10,000 off the value."
You cut the wall over. It was crazy. And then and then it was funny because then when I got older, like when I was in my teens, I actually moved into like the garage of the house. Where like the washer dryer, because we had this big garage and had a big loft in it, and that's where I like had my bed, and I pretty much made like my own apartment inside of our house, like where I lived in there. And so it was always, you know, trying to make a space, you know, trying to be like, I need some space, and I need some autonomy. And I mean, I think that, I mean, it's interesting working through that stuff, because a lot of the things, I think the things that are so weird, it's like when you go back in your memory and you realize the things that are bothering you, or like the things that you hang on to, and sometimes they're really weird, you know, where it's not some huge event or, oh, this terrible thing happened to me. It's like, you know, for me, it's like the things that really fuck with you are like the little, like the little squishy things, like where it's like, oh, this person didn't like me, or this person was mean to me, or this like tiny moment that like, or
a look.
Yeah. It's like, and that you can't shake it. Like it penetrates something like so like squishy, you know, where I'm like, it's like that little.
Can you share a squishy moment?
Well,
let me ask you this, because I'm thinking that your parents are writers, and you know that kind of, there's an absorption that happens with writers. Did you feel like that you had access to your parents, or were they not present?
Yeah. Oh my God. No. Well, I mean, my parents got divorced. My mom and my dad got divorced.
Because of the hole in the wall?
Yeah, that was it. It all fell down. No, no, they got divorced. I mean, I probably was like 11 or something when they got divorced. And my dad, like legitimately went crazy. Like he like was not fun to deal with after that. And I pretty much stopped talking to him, which was an amazing revelation too. Cause I mean, I had this moment, I think the last time I spoke to him, I was around like 14 or 15, and he was like sociopathic, like,
oh wow,
he was an a-hole, and really, really started losing it in the end. Like he, I mean, and there was stuff like he became a born again Christian, but he was having like affairs with the women in his church group, and he was like, and then as that progressed, like he, Jesus was telling him what numbers to gamble in Vegas and stuff. So it was just kind of like, oh, okay. And it's one of those things, like, I think it really fucked up my brother and my sister a lot more. It's one of the things that for some reason, I'm grateful in some ways that I was younger, and that I had this like again, like how I was always building spaces, there was something in me that recognized, like,
I need to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, like my family is crazy, and something gave me that little bit of distance to be like, to not take it on like mine, not be like, oh, something, it was like, that person is messed up. Like, it's like that person. And I remember I was like in 8th grade, and he had gotten remarried, and he had these two new stepdaughters, and he would just only tell us about how amazing his new stepdaughters were. And I was like, well, this is annoying. And
that's sad.
Really sad, really sad. And I remember this conversation I had with him, because when I was in 8th grade, I like became student council president, and I did this like full on like rap for my speech, like to become student council president. Like I went to this, school in Florida called Southside Fundamental, and it was, it was awesome. And it was a great moment. And I remember talking to my dad, and I was like, oh yeah, I became student council president. He's like, oh, so did what's her face, his daughter. And I was like, yeah, but it was really cool, because I like did a rap for my speech. And he's like, oh, so did his daughter. And I was like, okay. So, but like, no.
Do you feel like he was like disassociating himself from you because of the guilt of maybe how he acted?
I don't know. I don't know what he was doing. I mean, he was a really, yes. I mean, maybe. I can't really, he was not good with responsibility. I can tell you that.
Right.
Like, I mean, my mom and I were just talking about it, because some of that I've inherited. Like, he would do weird things where, like, we'd get the bills, and he would put them in shoe boxes and hide them in the closet, and then say that he paid them. And I was like, I think I inherited that, to be like, I'm just not going to even look at that. And then
this doesn't exist.
Yeah, I'm done. I don't see it. It's fine. And he, I mean, and there were certain things like that. Like, he evaded paying child support once they were divorced. Like, if he got a job, they'd start to garnish his wages. He'd quit. Like, he just like, really did that. And then he ended up getting lymphoma, and he died when I found out when I was like 18, because I had come home I had gone to NYU, and I had come home, I think it was during my first break, so it might have been like Christmas break or something like that. And it was super weird, because I got a letter from the child services, because it was saying that my claim for child support was being terminated, and then in a list of reasons, the box checked was person is deceased. And I was like,
that's how he got out of it.
Yeah, that's how he dodged it. And it was crazy, because I like had to call the people and be like, I'm sorry, is this letter informing me that my father is dead? And they were like, oh, we're sorry that this is how you found out, but yes, that's what it means. I was like, okay.
And it was kind of his message to you, saying, I'm still going to do it.
Yeah. I'm still like, fuck you. Yeah. And it was, and it's weird too, because speaking of like forgetting in memory, like I recently had this thing, because my sister has like a ridiculously different relationship and version of him, and it like that's interestingly like shockingly dissonant, like where she's generated this like, I was daddy's little girl and he's the greatest person ever, and my mom is like the demon to her. Like, I just, it's really amazing, because it's just kind of this, like, it's so incredible. Again, like the issue of like two people are having very similar, you know, same house, same people, but could not be more diametrically opposed in like how we remember this person, react to this you know, it's a total trip. It's a total trip.
I mean, not that it's important, but do you think he was like borderline or something like that?
Abso-fucking-lutely. I mean, just, yeah. Like, I mean, I don't know exactly what it was, but definitely
Right.
some mental health issues, which is interestingly helpful in my adulthood to go back, like, because I mean, I had my reaction to it when you're a kid, and then in my, you know, grown-up life, I've come to peace with a lot of that, because the more you understand about mental health and all these things, is you're like, oh, okay, like that, yeah, that person needed a lot of help, and you know, was a narcissist, I mean, it's interesting watching, you know, all things play out on the world stage, because now there's like a real public conversation about what is like narcissism look like, and you're like, oh, right, that's what it looks like in this like, yeah, I mean, and again, like, and he was a disappointed artist, you know, like that's a
Like
big,
Hitler.
yes, exactly, you know, where he, you know, wanted to be this great thinker and this great writer. He was a history teacher, and but I mean, he's such a character. He was obsessed with Napoleon, you know. Like, I'm like, that's
In what way?
intense.
You
Like,
mean like,
obsessed with, he wrote like a book of quotes about Napoleon. Like, we had Napoleon memorabilia in the house and stuff. Like, he was obsessed with Napoleon.
was he short?
No,
Okay.
no. So it wasn't that. It wasn't about that. It wasn't about like, I mean, I think all power is about compensating for something,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it was about, yeah, the power or the wisdom, or I don't know, the strategy. I'm not sure.
Hmm. So when he passed away, what did you feel?
Well, I mean, not much, which is, I mean, that's back to when you asked about the trauma of childhood, and it's about like moving in different schools, is I think that that's something that I've started to realize is like, I don't like, death always has registered for me in this very abstract way. Like, it's just kind of like, there's very few deaths that have happened in my life that really, I would say, like, affected me in the traditional way that I think that, where you see people in movies, or you see like, oh,
With a
that's how,
camera from above
yeah,
and looking
yeah, and
up
you're like,
and
why, you know, or it's like
right.
the Steel Magnolias, you know, like, there's a few, and they're always like kind of odd, like the ones that really get to me. But more than anything, it's just, again, I think, when back to our original like Ahab conversation, of it's really just like this experience of it's almost like more a philosophical experience of absence, and what does that mean, like, what does it mean? And I think that that's one of those things, like the fundamental irony of life is that we die, you know. Like, it's like the incomprehensible otherness is like, I am going to not be someday. And what the fuck is that about?
And
Because
that's a
all,
weird feeling, like this is all going to be over.
yes,
And what is that going to be like?
that's crazy.
Yeah.
There's a great, I think Eric Fromm, you know, he has this book Denial of Death, which is pretty much that all of life is just a game that we play, like staving off that thought of like, oh my god, like, I'm gonna die. Because to truly live in total awareness, acceptance, or whatever, would be insanity. You would be like batshit crazy if you really were like, could kind of swallow that. And so it's like the absurdity of that paradox of like, we are born to die, like as soon as we're born, like that's the only thing, like the absurdity of that is like always what hits me. I think when people die is you're just like, that was it, like that's that. It's like, oh my god, it's like a shockingly I mean, it's funny, Kierkegaard, Kierkegaard has this whole, he wrote his dissertation on the concept of irony. Mm-hmm. And he talks about it as like, for theater people, he's talking about, is it Aristophanes who wrote The Birds? Where in this old Greek play, it's a comedy, and like Socrates is like in a basket, like suspended over, the action, I think. And it's that state of suspension that I always like visually associate with irony, where you're just kind of like, what? Like, what? Like, that's crazy. And that and given, I mean, when I think about it, like when I really go there, I sometimes feel like, and it's weird to say this considering that my father has died, but it feels a lot like no one close enough to me has died to really like break through that ironic suspension. You know what I mean? Where it's like, I guarantee you, if something happened to my child, I wouldn't be like, what? That's crazy. Like I like, that is the great horror, I think, is the like, how,
But that's interesting, because in acting, that's one of the things that we explore, is that how do you react to something that life-changing, and not going for the stereotypical, cinematic camera overhead screaming to the sky. Why?
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. And and I've had the opportunity where people close to me have lost children. And I think it's like watching that process of watching how people don't fall apart, and that how you find meaning, and you find purpose, and you find connection, and you sublimate your loss by helping others, or communicating about it, or sharing your grief, and the power of those moments, and just the I mean, I think it's making me think right now of like, when we talk about the end of the patriarchy, to speak very broadly in generalized terms, like what an era infused with feminine energy or a matriarchal society would look like. And that so much of that is this, like, I mean, I think it was really powerful. I mean, there was this great example of the Prime Minister of New Zealand when there was the shooting at the mosque, and she like went and wept and like held the people, and how healing that was to be like, not respond with like, we're gonna get the people who did this, and because it's just not about, like, I mean, that's the thing I think that's, it's that
Captain Ahab.
Yeah,
seeking
exactly.
Revenge.
Because it's like, there is no, I mean, I think that's the thing that we like, the dirty secret is like, there is no justice. There is no balancing of the invisible scales of like, and now we've hurt the person who hurt the person, so everything's balanced. It's like, even if you do that, you're still gonna feel bad. Like, you're still gonna have to grieve. You're still gonna have like all this like stuff to process. And it's such an illusion of control that we're gonna, be like, well, we got the bad guy, and this is that, and the economy's great, so everybody should feel good. And I think that lends to that cognitive dissonance of like, I don't feel good.
Yeah, and
good.
and that's why Gandhi said, "An eye for an eye will make the whole world blind."
Right? Like it doesn't. I mean, in that, but the absurdity. I mean, and I find myself even doing that. I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine because he was like, you know, with the modern thing, he was like, don't you ever think you should get a gun? And I was like, no, I don't ever think I should get a gun. Like, no, I do not think that. And it's interesting. Like, I mean, and part of it was that I was like, you know, there's a lot of really concrete reasons where I'm like, I have a child. So if I have a gun, I have to keep it in a lockbox. So if somebody is like breaking into my house to do something or any circumstance in which I might want to grab said gun, I gotta fiddle with a fucking lockbox. Like,
Yeah, and that's going to be real easy when you're stressed.
In the middle of the night, wake up. I was like, yeah. So there's no good outcome. And then there's like the statistics that most of the time, if you own a gun, you're arming the person who's gonna kill you with it. So I'm like, don't really want to do that. And then there's just the energetic of living in my own body in a state at which I'm consciously summoning the fact that I think I'm going to shoot somebody at some point. Like, I'm like, no. And coming to peace with like, you know, that's the thing when you think about it, like if it's my final moment on this earth, do I want that to be like, I'm taking you with me? Like, is that what I want my last moment to be like? Or do you kind of just want to be like, okay, like, all right, here we go. You know,
Right.
it's like, I don't, like, you know, and I think, you know, when you really think about those like nonviolence, you know, as a practice and as a way of living, and what is it, I mean, and that's the thing, is what is it that makes some of us okay with that, you know, to be like, yeah, that's how I want to be in the world. And some people so virulently against like the concept of like, you know, not fighting. Like, not fighting.
Mostly the defense industry is against it.
Well, right, but
Yeah.
but I think that so much of it is it's illusions of control, and it's illusions of amplification of power, and thinking that this thing that you're going to do is going to make you feel safer or make you feel more powerful, and it doesn't. I mean, that it doesn't, and it's I mean, it's really interesting through the lens of like, yeah, addiction, of how it's like once you start arming yourself, it's never enough, because you realize like you cannot possibly eliminate every possibility. I mean, that's kind of the beauty, and I know this is a horrible thing to say on some level, but it's the beauty of the coronavirus period, of it's like, I could be living in like in a fortress with guns and cannons galore, and some tiny little fucking germ is gonna creep in and to be like, take me out.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so I think it gets back to just that value on my lived experience, you know, and like, do I really want to spend my day fortifying my compound, you know, against enemies? And it's like, I don't have any enemies, you know, I don't. Like, who's my enemy? You know, it's crazy. It's crazy. And then I mean, and that's a very personal choice. Like, I'm happier considering like, yeah, I don't want to think those thoughts. I got other thoughts I'd rather think. I got other things I'd rather focus on. And of course that comes from a position of privilege, to be able to think other thoughts and not feel like I constantly have to arm or defend myself, you know. but yeah.
Well, I mean, the other thing is those that are adamant about using violence and force, especially if they have not experienced it, don't understand the trauma associated with taking another human being's life. And there's a great book by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. It's called On Killing. And it talks about how throughout history, how difficult it was to get armies to kill other people. And it talks about, like, during the Civil War, for example, they had two lines that were facing each other and they were looking each other right in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found was that after the battle was over, that, they had the whole ritual of reloading and firing and stuff, is they found that when they picked up the rifles, many of the rifles were loaded multiple times without being fired.
Mm.
So most of the damage came from the artillery, where they couldn't even see who they were killing.
Yeah.
And that's why they've created now mechanical distancing with drones and so on.
Yeah.
So, which is horrifying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's so much of the machinery is about creating distance. It's about keeping people out of the same room with each other and about not seeing each other as human beings, because I think that's it's funny with the rise of I just flashed to when I was in high school. I got really into Rastafarianism. I was like, I want to be a Rastafarian, and I remember it was Bob Marley had this great thing that he said, which was about, like, that's why the government doesn't want us to smoke weed, is because you put any two people in a room together and smoke weed and they realize they're exactly the same. That they'll be like, oh, hey, you're like, hey, fellow human, what's up? Like, all of that. It's those great equalizers where you just go like, oh, right. Oh, and you see, that with people doing the work of meeting and communicating and talking one-on-one, when it's not, I mean, it's like, that's why I despise all kinds of groups and rallies and all those things, because it is like as meaningful as it can be and as important as it is to show numbers, alternatively, it also kind of contributes to this sense of like mob mentality and people getting real fired up and feeling like, identifying that they're part of this thing. And the label, again, with the labeling, the labels we put on things, because it's so uncomfortable, I think, to sit in our own mess of paradoxes and contradictory impulses and things that we feel that aren't so clear, that it's tremendously relieving sometimes to put a label on yourself and be like, oh, well, I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Republican, or I'm a whatever the fuck I am, that kind of closes off a certain amount of discomfort in terms of these things that maybe I feel don't fit about me, or that are a little incongruous or a little, janky. And that there's a way that that it stops us from having to do that inner work of like being who we are.
That's why I love that quote from Rumi: out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there's a field. I will meet you there.
Yeah. And that stuff is like, I mean, it's so crazy. Like, I was just having this conversation with my kid of like the amazing and mystical truth of life that I come back to time and time again, is that my only job on this planet, this go round, is to be myself. That's it. Like, and it's the only job I can do, and it's the only job I can do well. It's like, it's to be like, I gotta be me.
Do you feel like that you're comfortable with yourself? Do you feel like you are? Do you know who you are?
No. I mean, no. But that's why I think it's a lifetime journey. And I think, and then
we die.
And then we die. Like, it's so crazy. Like, right at it's like, it's like the weirdest orgasm, you know, it's like right at the cusp. You know, you're like, I've lived this entire life to become who I am, and then I fucking die. It's like, oh my God. Like what? That's so great. But then it's funny, because I think that there's something about that though that makes sense to artists, because it's like doing a play, you know, like there's nothing more imbecilic and insane in some ways than doing a play, where it's like we do all this work and we do all this rehearsing, and then you just do it and then it's gone, you know, like it just happened, and then you're like, what the fuck was that about? And it just exists in this like airy memory of like little bits of moments and stuff, and that there's something so valuable about that can't be like reproduced and commodified in the right way. Like it's like any kind of experience. It's like, you know, people compare seeing a beautiful sunset. Like there's those moments where you see a sunset and it's so beautiful and you go, I don't know what to do with this. Like I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now. Like I'm just seeing, do I take a picture? I don't know what to do, you know, and it's that's like a lifelong project. But yeah, I always say, it's funny, I always say like I am 1,000% contented with who I am, except for as soon as I look at any other person on the planet, and then I go like, wait, am I supposed to do that? Like I'm like, I don't understand. Like it's so crazy, because well, I mean, yeah, it's a difficult thing to come back to self, you know.
Well, that's a really beautiful metaphor, because I think about theater a lot, even though I haven't done it in many, many years. I think about, I every day, I've actually been thinking about it recently, about how much I enjoyed the rehearsal process. That was my favorite part of it, the discovery, the surprises, the moments. The shows were fun, but it was the rehearsal is what. And I'm glad you brought it up. You used the phrase, I get off on it, dramaturgy. Yeah. Because that's what I got off on was the process. And the process is so important, is enjoying the process.
It's all there is. I mean, really, and I think we hear that echoed through all kinds of arts and all kinds of people. Like it's really all about the process. And I think that again, in our, you know, industrial capitalist commodifying society, it's really hard to wrap your mind around that it's like these invisible moments that are about that interiority and about that. I mean, that's one of the things when I think about in my life, I have never laughed as hard as I laugh in rehearsal for plays. Like the things you discover and the weirdness in the moments of timing and like the humanity and
bloopers.
And just how your own brain works or what it is that you want to see. Like those, when I think about rehearsal, like that's the thing that brings me back to it. Because a lot of the things, I mean, it's so difficult to get your energy up to do theater. I mean, just because there's no financial reason to do it. There's no, like, there's all these reasons not to do it. And then there's like that thing that happens where it really is. I mean, I think that's one of, I mean, and this is going to be a really interesting time, I think, coming out of pandemic and what's going to happen to theater and how theater again finds its meaning, you know, in terms of what is it that makes it different about all the other arts, you know, that there is something that happens that it's particularly good at, and it really has to do, I think, with that humanity and that process and that discovery and how we work together, like how we negotiate and how, you know, focus and energy and attention shifts. I mean, I remember railing at actors. Because one of the things that drives me crazy is you know, when people jump a line, and I'm just livid because I'm like, how can you, like, it's such a clear indication that you're only thinking about yourself. Like, because you're just counting, going like, and then I say, and then I say, and then I say.
Yeah.
And it's such a
Your line,
great,
your line, my line, your line, your, yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
and there's so many aspects. I mean, I think that's the thing of, like, you know, theater training and stuff. There's so many aspects that is just trying to get us to pay attention to another person who's not us. Like, please just look at this other person. And it's, I mean, and I think that there's so much, I mean, that's the things I trip out on. There's so much philosophically that happens in why certain things work. And even the discovery, you know, as a director, the discovery that like shit that feels good to the actor doesn't necessarily transmit to the person watching. Like, you guys can feel super good that you're in each other's face and you got this, like, but your energetic field is like that long and you're like, beep, 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 beep. And it's so weird just to think like, no, you got to send it out, like, to that, like, it's for them. This is for them, you know? And how it you know, which is why I have like an appreciation of certain things, like, you know, like I study some viewpoints or whatever it is, like that's like opening up your whole awareness of space and how every energy and everything is interconnected. And then I think we have those moments, you know, in performing and in creating, usually in rehearsal. I mean, I think that's the thing that happens. It's rare that they happen in performance. I think like performance is always like a semi-sad semblance of like what happened in rehearsal. Like, that's what it feels like. I love, there's the painter Agnes Martin has like beautiful writings on art, and that's one of the things that is it's like, you know, failure is kind of the natural state of the artist, is to not be satisfied. And the part of it is, she says, like, we can see perfectly but we can't do perfectly. And I think that's some of the pain. Jeremy Zuckerman, who composed Or the Whale, actually, he and I used to talk about this all the time, of like, it's a peculiar like philosophical outlook where I know in advance that every piece of work I make is going to be a failure. Like, where I'm like, there's an acceptance that it's like, I am never going to make the thing that's in my mind. Like, and some of that is the good news, because I'm not an industrial, you know, machine that's going to be like cha-chunk and put out the thing that's in my mind. And that so much of the things that I create, I mean, and that's why I love too, like, collaborating with people, because so much of the things that I make are so much more than the thing that I had in my mind. And it is the quirkiness and the weirdness and the new discoveries that kind of amplify and make it all that much more interesting. But it's an odd, you know, venture. It's like starting a business and being like, well, we're gonna fail, but let's go. Like, let's do
that model probably wouldn't go well with shareholders.
To be like, it's gonna be a catastrophic failure. However, we're gonna have fun. Like, let's do it.
So where did you find your theatrical voice? I know you went to Tisch, right? Is that it, or did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. When I think back, I mean, I was in theater forever. Like, I did my first play in kindergarten.
What was it?
I was the Queen of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland, or something like that, or some variant of Alice in Wonderland. All I remember is I got to sit on a throne and I was like the Queen of Hearts, and I think I had like one thing that I said.
You remember what it was?
No.
Okay.
But I remember just being like, I got a thing I gotta say. And then but throughout school, like, I always gravitated to theater stuff. I made a play out of everything. I made plays at home, and we did performances, and we reenacted things, and we had like a back porch and would like stage things with neighborhood kids, and every book report I ever did in school was like a performance art piece.
How did that go over?
It was awesome. It was just ridiculous. I mean, it was hysterical. Everything was a production. Like, it was always like, let's do this. And and then the first thing I remember when I was in high school, I went to an arts high school where I studied theater all through high school. And I mean, my junior year of high school, I actually moved to Bermuda and was involved with the theater there. And then moved back and did my senior year. I was in Medea. I got to be Medea. I mean, and I was obsessed. It's funny because I was always, my dream was always to be an actor. Like I was like, I want to be an actor. I want to be in New York. I want to be on stage. Like that was my drive. But in my senior year of high school, I remember we had this final show we did, and I actually like generated my first piece where it was like stuff I wrote in it was like a weird amalgam of performance art and whatever. And then
so the avant garde was always there. It wasn't, you weren't doing like Tennessee Williams.
No, it was always pretty weird. Like it was always a little far out and
experimental.
And then when I went to NYU, I remember because when you audition and you go to Tisch, they have all the different schools, and part of it was, you know, I didn't want to choose because you could choose like Strasberg or Stella Adler or whatever, and I was like, I don't want to choose a single thing, which is kind of like the story of my life. I don't want to choose a single thing. And so I went to Playwrights Horizons, where you do acting, directing, and playwriting. Like you got to do all of them, and design. I think you did everything. And and that was at Playwrights Horizons. That's where I met Travis. I had another amazing teacher, Maureen Pennison. She was kind of like my main acting teacher, and like the first person to call me on my shit, which was great. And I think that's one of the things I really appreciate about Travis as well is, and I'm going to sound like a real asshole when I say that, and when I say this, and it's okay, where what Maureen called me on was just because my half-ass is better than most people's good doesn't mean that I get to do half-ass. Like she was like, no, like she was like, you have more than the bullshit you're dialing in right now. Even though your bullshit will fly, you need to go deeper. I was like, okay. so it was. You
were fortunate she was able to see that and bring that out.
Unbelievably fortunate, you know, because it's because I think the other thing is that, you know, more than, not that it's an egotistical like, oh, I'm so great. It's I think just on a universal sense, what so many people long for is being seen. Is like somebody is paying attention to my bullshit, or able to see through, you know, my smoke and mirrors, blah, 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 and is like, no, I see you, and I see what you're doing. And I mean, and sometimes those moments can cause you to like wither and retreat, but sometimes they can really cause you to be like, okay, motherfucker, let's go.
Yeah, I was a witherer and retreater for sure.
It's hard, you know, like it's hard. I think it's I mean, that's honestly, I think my husband is a bit of a wither retreat, like where he, you know, it's weird and miraculous to be like, what is it that makes you able to be like, fuck it, you know, like, go like, I don't care, you know, like in a way that's not just, I don't know, but I also remember I had my first directing teacher at Tisch was this guy, Bob Moss, who is a classic guy. And I remember, and I would do these pieces that were so weird. And part of it was like when I started directing, because I always was like, I want to be an actor, you know. And then when I got to New York, something I think the actor part of me actually had the like withering response actually, but the director part of me is like, fuck yeah. Because there was something that did start to retreat in terms of a real unwillingness to like do what it takes to be an actor. Like I was like, nope, I don't want to do any of this. And that has, you know, a lot of deeper thing of like, yeah, like where I was at as a person and my feelings about myself and all this, like, but it was kind of this like, you know, that started to recede, and this like directorial voice started to come out. And I think part of it, and I remember doing these pieces, and I also think it's kind of what got me into philosophy too, because it's like, it was the thought where when you're acting, you're kind of controlling, you know, you have domain over this small part of your world. But then when you get into writing and directing, suddenly it was like, I get to make the world. Like I get to do whatever I want. And I was like a kid in a candy store. Like you could just do the weirdest stuff and get people to do the weirdest stuff and create these like awkward situations or these like horrifying situations. And I remember doing these pieces. My first piece that I directed at NYU, because the whole first semester they would make us do these pieces that had to be, there was no language. It was all just movement, but had to be situations in which it made sense not to speak. So it wasn't like pantomiming anything. It was like these vignettes or whatever of like, it would completely be all right to not speak in this situation. So the first piece that I did was a ritual group suicide. was like a group of people, and it was so twisted. And like, it was these people playing spin the knife, and then people would kill themselves and they'd make out, and then somebody would die, and then it got down to the last two people, and pretty much the one person stabbed the other person and stole the radio and left. And it was just,
it's kind of like, a metaphor for life,
right? Like to be like, here, groupthink, let's do it. And it was like, and I remember, and then my second piece was like horrifying, was like a group of like people having a party, and they wake up their friend, and then they end up like killing his mom, and then he like has sex with his mom's dead body. And it was like completely fucking batshit. And I remember my two things. I remember my teacher being like, if this was directed by a man, I probably would have stopped the piece. Because it was so like, what? And then he said that the thing that made him uncomfortable about my work is that he didn't know whether or not I was being serious. And that, I think, is the signature hallmark of almost all of my work, is I was like, exactly, you know, because, and I think that's where I like fell in love with the theory of like Brechtian theater, is it's like that sweet spot of that I want to create work, and because the truth is that I'm always being serious and I'm always fucking joking. Like I am right there in the middle, and I don't know either. Like it's right in this spot, and that I want to create work that puts the audience in a position of not being told how to feel. Like, I don't want to tell you how to feel. I don't want you to know, oh, this is where I laugh, this is where I cry, this is happy, this is sad. Like, I love the like unsureness of having to sort out your own shit, you know. And that part of the joy of making work for me is not to put something out there that has a prescribed reaction. Like it's literally a conversation to go like, what do you make of this? Like, how do you respond to this? And that however you respond to it is okay with me.
It's like a Rorschach test.
Yes. Yeah. Where it's just like, cause I don't know. I mean, I may know how I respond to this, or I may not, because it's like, that's the other thing too, is I've watched things that I've done or things that I've written, and I have a variety of responses to it over time, where I'm like, and now I feel like this. And I think that, and it's probably the reason why I'm not like wildly successful, you know, and then too, because people crave being told how to feel. and being told how to react, and being told like, and feeling that they're right, and that they're in on the joke, and that they figured out the riddle, and oh, isn't it all so great, and that we love that illusion of control, and that illusion of a world that is not scary and threatening and unclear and convoluted and messed up. Like, we just want somebody to be like, just tell me how it is, and yes, I agree, there's black and white, there's right and wrong, you know. But the lived experience is so much more swampy. It's so much more swampy.
Yeah. I was thinking when you mentioned the Brechtian thing, I remember, I mean, it's not so much that way anymore. I mean, it's so weird now with my eyesight. I mean, I don't really see very much anymore. It's just shapes and bright light and, you know, foggy shadows, and it's just weird. But when I was at one point in my vision loss, I was like, I feel like I have this Brechtian distancing screen like right in front of me all the time. And I'm like, it's distancing me from reality, or at least my perception of what I thought reality was.
Right. Well, and that's amazing that the definition of reality can shift. Like, that you go like, how, you know, how are you, is the thought that if you can't see that you're excluded from reality? You're like, no.
I feel like that sometimes.
I'm sure. And I mean, I think
I literally have to grab things sometimes because I don't feel like I exist.
Yeah.
Like I'll have to reach for something and be like, I'm still here. You know?
Yes.
And I still do it because there's days where I'll be in the middle of a conversation and I'll like reach under the table to grab it to say, where the fuck am I?
You
know, but yeah, it's a weird thing. But so how you mentioned I had no idea that you had played music before Cal Arts, because I thought what happened is you were at Cal Arts, then you went and got your Ph.D. and then, or maybe no, it was before that. And I remember, I feel like I saw you like when you first started. When did the Evangenitals start?
We played our very first open mic.
Was it on Highland?
Yeah, at Mr. T's Bowl. We did our very first open mic in Highland Park at Mr. T's Bowl on Figueroa, and it was December of 2003 because it was Christmas time. We did it as a joke. My best friend Lisa D and I we went on like a day trip to Ventura, and we were driving in my topless like Suzuki Samurai, and we were freezing, and we were singing Christmas carols at the top of our lungs, and we thought it would be really funny to go to the open mic at Mr. T's Bowl and sing Christmas carols. Mm-hmm. And then so we did it, and we sang 2 Christmas carols, and we sang Queequeg, my song about Queequeg from Moby Dick. And it was weird. So yeah, my musical journey was a little weird because like when I lived in New York, I had gone and seen Kachow, the Cuban band leader, in concert, and was like, the upright bass is the greatest instrument on the face of the planet. And I went to a pawn shop and I bought an upright bass, and I got a bass teacher. My boyfriend at the time had been taking guitar lessons, and he took guitar lessons, and I took bass lessons from the same teacher, this guy John Brandt, who lived in Brooklyn. Were you going to start a band? No. Oh, okay. It was really like because at that point, I mean, I really became kind of like a bizarre social mutant in a lot of ways, like with directing. Like I receded in a lot of ways, and I mean, it was really just something that we did with no thought of doing it in public or anything. So we, you know, hung out in our apartment, and we drank a lot, and we smoked a lot of pot, and fucking made up songs. And that was it. And we had these little simple songs, and yeah, did not ever think about like, oh, and someday I'm going to be this and that. It's like, it was really just its own thing. And I took lessons, and never got great at the upright, but had like written these songs. It was good enough to play like some like country licks and little things, and just enjoyed it. I just enjoyed it. And then you know, he was from LA, so that was like after NYU and doing all that stuff, you know, it's like winter was coming and I was like, it's too cold, let's go to sunny LA, let's get out of here. And
I thought it was like you were doing a reference to Game of Thrones.
I know, right? It was true though. Winter really was coming. But it was funny because I had this moment where I was living in New York and I worked at a bookstore and I was directing shows off Broadway, and I had this thought like, wow, I could do this forever. And then my next thought was like, we should move. It's like, we got to get out of here. And it was a crazy thought because I thought like I should go to LA and do theater because it'll be hard. Because my perception was theater in New York was easy. So let's go to LA where theater will be hard because nobody cares. Like, it's just absurd. Yeah. And that kind of like quest for absurdity seems to be like one of the defining features of how I make decisions. And so we drove across country with my bass.
I'm hearing a lot of song titles, by the way. Quest
right?
for Absurdity.
Quest for Absurdity. It's all of them. It's my biography. That's a chapter heading of my autobiography. So we drove across the country, came out here. We went to Guatemala for a little while, learned Spanish, came back. And I was just hanging out in Los Angeles. I had, like, there's all these bizarre decisions that led to other decisions. So I got this job, like, because I was in LA, I really wanted to get my finger on the pulse of like, what's LA about, like experimental theater in LA. So I had this idea that I should become a stripper, because at that point I was like overweight and cripplingly shy. So I was like, that's what I should do. So I started like exercising. We lived out in Sierra Madre at first, and I would hike the Mount Wilson Trail every day for 4 months. And I started like losing weight and getting in shape because I wanted to be a stripper. And then,
like you do,
it happens, you know, happens to lots of people. And then I was like, well, I'm not really ready to like interface with humanity. So I wanted to get like a behind the scenes, you know, adult industry job. I wanted something to do with the adult industry. I also really wanted to be a bartender at a bowling alley, but I could not get a job as a bartender in a bowling alley. I tried. I applied to every bowling alley I could find in Los Angeles area. I couldn't get a job.
Why so specific?
It just seemed absurd. It seemed like something out of a book. I don't know. Like, I was like,
were you like searching for the Lebowski or what?
I don't know what I was doing. I was just like really wanted to be. I was like, that's perfect.
Wait a minute. Where did the boxing come in?
Well, so I got a job at this online adult toy company, and that seemed like
this
close.
Is before CalArts?
This was before CalArts, yeah. So, because I was in LA for a little bit before the CalArts experience, and then because I got a job at the sex toy company, and then we had been living in Sierra Madre, and then we ended up moving because the company was run out of my boss's apartment, which was in Los Feliz, and then there was a storefront underneath, and it opened up, and we ended up moving into the storefront. So I lived like underneath the sex toy company. But then I lost my mountain.
That's a Tom Waits song, by the way.
Right, underneath the sex toy company. It was right there by.
I lived underneath the sex toy company.
If I was living a Tom Waits song at that time, it's true. But then I lost my mountain. So my boss at the time had been going to the Hollywood YMCA. So he like took me to the Hollywood Y, and I'm looking at like classes and what am I going to do. So it's still with the intention of like, I'm getting in shape to be a stripper. And I was like, I can't take aerobics. I can't do that. This is all dumb.
Was there an artistic, I don't mean to interrupt, but was there an artistic reason to want to be a stripper, or did
no, I saw it as a form of experimental theater. Like I was like, this is like LA experimental theater would be exotic dancing. Like that's what I saw as like a primal performative exchange in the real world, you know, like that's kind of was the lens, and like a like a fundamental challenge to who I thought I was. Like that's part of it too, is always like through these actions, like when we were talking earlier about knowing who you are, I think challenge, like when they talk about doing things outside your comfort zone, like taking these actions that aren't intuitive and you have no empirical evidence to think you can do these things, like suddenly unlocks another level of like, oh, I didn't know I was capable of that. I didn't know that I was that person. So for me, that seemed like the furthest point I could imagine from who I thought I was and what I thought I was capable of. Like, I was like, this really will be like transformative for me to try to do that. Like it's because it was not who I think I am. But then I went to the Hollywood Y and they had a boxing class, and I met this man named Mick E. Jones, who was like preacher, storyteller, actor, boxing teacher, guy at the Y. And he was incredible. And I started taking this class, and I was like taking this class like it was my job. I was like religiously taking this class, and still no thought of.
Did you tell him that like my ultimate goal is to strip, by the way?
We didn't talk about that.
Oh,
but
okay.
but I was like, he just knew that I was really focused. Like I was like showing up, doing it. And I guess it was that he had told us about like building wind and that we should be running, and then he saw me running one morning like out in Los Feliz, and I actually did it. And then he said to me, he was like, you should consider taking this seriously. And I was like, taking what seriously? And he was like, being a boxer. And he was training a girl out of a pro gym, and was like, why don't you come down to the gym and you should take this, see about it. And it just like unlocked my brain. Cause again, like as a person who really had no relationship with sports, like I didn't think about, like it was this moment where I realized like, oh, right. Like basketball players play basketball for a living. Like that's what they do. Like that, and it just was this whole other world I hadn't thought about of sport as performance and sport as experimental theater. And Muhammad Ali is like the most famous person in the world. And you're like, oh, right. And then could bring that together with like the primal drama of boxing, where it's like two people in the squared circle and all this stuff. And I was like, this is exactly what I should do. It's like, oh my God. And I went to this gym and I met the head trainer, and he was funny because I was like, I want to be a boxer. And he's like, you look like a librarian. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And I like was all in, because then it just was like, this is even more insane than being a stripper. Like this is crazy. Is I'm gonna fight people. Like I'm a pacifist, non-violent. I don't even like to get in arguments with people. I hate yelling at people. Like I was like, this is complete insanity.
Did you think about merging stripping while boxing?
No,
Okay.
Because that's like, I mean, and especially because they do merge in a weird way.
Oh, really?
Well, they do, because you have a lot of girls. I mean, my very first fight was like, my first pro fight was a girl who was like a bikini model who decided to try to be a pro boxer, and I knocked her out in 70 seconds because it's like, those two don't go together. But a lot of, I mean, there's a whole history of like foxy boxing, and that it has to be sexualized for it to be entertaining, So in fact, I was virulently against that. It was like, no, that it was really about the boxing. So it was crazy.
I have to stop. One thing. Yeah. The story was at Cal Arts is that you were trained by the same trainer that the Clint Eastwood character in $1 Million Baby.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Well, it's a little convoluted, because my pro trainer was a man named Dub Huntley, who trained a lot of amazing champions, also Layla Ali. And he is an amazing Black man. So, and then his best friend is this guy, Jerry Boyd, who was my cornerman, who wrote under the name FX Tool, and he wrote the short story Million Dollar Baby. So in the story of Million Dollar Baby, and subsequently in the movie, Jerry inverted the roles so that the Morgan Freeman character that was not the main trainer, in real life, Dub, who would have been the Morgan Freeman, was the actual trainer, and Jerry, the white guy, Clint Eastwood, was the assistant cut man. But Jerry, of course, in the story made himself the main trainer. But yes, but that is accurate and true that he wrote Million Dollar Baby, and when he I mean, it's funny because we had met early on, because I worked at another gym when I was kind of going through the amateurs, and then I worked with a great amateur coach who became my manager, and then when I was getting ready, like after I graduated from Cal Arts and was getting ready to turn pro, that's when I started working with Dub, who was like my pro trainer, and but I had kind of known them because Dub was actually the trainer of my previous trainer. So it's like, it was a legacy. But Dub is like, he was like my dad. I just talked to him the other day. Like, we still talk, and he's amazing. And, but it was crazy because Jerry and I I hated Million Dollar Baby. So much. I hated the story. I hated the premise. Yeah, because it was kind of like
a lot of disability advocates are very upset by the ending.
Yes, because it's a load of horseshit. And then beyond that, it's like that story. So Jerry fundamentally was against women boxing. And that story is like his incredibly egocentric and self-centered justification for why women shouldn't fight. And it's all about him. And it's all about, well, I'm going to care about her, and then she'll get hurt. And he was the Irish Catholic, and he's like, and then I'll have to do an assisted suicide, and now I'm going to go to hell. I was just like, dude, it's like, what the fuck? And I have issues with power in that story. Like, it's always the men giving her permission to do the thing that she wants to do. Like, it's a highly problematic story, and I found it really irritating. So we would argue about it. And then when he optioned it as a film, he like had sent fight tapes of me and all this stuff to the producers, and then there was a bunch of stuff, like, because we were going to meet with the producers, and then and Jerry had a heart attack, and he did that frequently, but then this time he had a heart attack and went into a coma and for a long time, and then he died. So he died before the movie ever got made, and then in the interim between, he died, I had retired from boxing, and then it was probably like 2 years later that the movie actually came out. So then it was super trippy, because then everybody started calling me like, have you seen this movie? Like, this is crazy. It's just like,
it was said at Cal Arts that it was based on you.
I think aspects of the character were based on me, and there are like conversations in that movie that were conversations that we had, and a lot of the training dynamics. But yes, I wasn't from the same kind of extreme hardship. But I was a person from the South who got involved in boxing later in life, and Jerry was incredibly taken with like my skill level. And I mean, it's funny because, again, through the lens of like feminism now, I mean, that's the great compliment when you're a female boxer, is that you fight like a man. That you're like, and that's all of my sparring partners were men. Like, I sparred with Manny Pacquiao, I sparred with Jose Casamayor, I sparred with the Gabriel and Rafael Ruelas. Like, I sparred with all of these world champion dude fighters, and that was the great measure, is like, you can hang with those guys. And then like, I was a paid sparring partner for like Mia St. John and some of the Cynthia Prouder and some of the more kind of established women fighters at the time. But yeah, it always struck me as like kind of the, you know, now it's the whole parlance of like fight like a girl, you know, where.
Well, I really want to understand like how, I mean, to that drive to win. And like, I mean, I've listened to professional boxers talk about, you know, about what drove them. Did you have anger, or was it, were you unleashing something, or what drove you?
I mean, I didn't think that I had anger, because actually anger is a real detriment in the ring. Like any kind of like actual emotion, it's not great, and truly gets in the way. I mean, I think it probably would make more sense and people would understand that if you were talking about through the lens of like martial arts or playing chess. It's like you're not getting, you know, it's not about fighting. And in fact, some of the funniest things I've ever seen is like, I remember one time at the gym seeing two incredibly well-trained elite boxers, two guys, get mad at each other in the ring and get in a fight, and watch all of that training and skill go right down the toilet. And suddenly they're like wide open, making haymakers, you know, because it's like, that's what emotion does. So it's funny, because I remember, because I started boxing right about the same time I got into Cal Arts, because it was funny, because I had called a friend and they had said Travis was in town, and I was like, reached out to Travis, and next thing I know, I'm at Cal Arts. It was like,
so you were doing it simultaneously?
Yeah. So I started training in the amateurs almost exactly the same time I started Cal Arts. So the whole time I was at Cal Arts, I was going through the amateurs in LA, and I became the LA district champion 2 times in a row. I was like a blue and gold national champion. And so, you know, it was a crazy schedule, because I would like go to the gym in like early in the morning, train, go to Cal Arts, do class, come back to the gym, train, go back to Cal Arts for rehearsal. There was a period where I was driving over 100 miles a day, because I like lived downtown, was training on Wilshire and La Brea, and driving up to Cal Arts and just doing this crazy circle of training. And then I'd have, you know, my exhibitions and my fights. I mean, I remember my very first exhibition, like a month in, because I had been training in the amateurs for like a month. And my trainer at the time really wanted me to do a public exhibition, because he didn't want to waste his time if I was going to crumble in front of a crowd, you know, because there's all these moments, like people can be incredibly good in the gym, but there's like these defining moments that you really just don't know until it happens. Like, how are you going to react to getting hit? Because some people, the first time they really take a punch in the face, they're just like, yeah, I'm done. Like, I'm done. Like, that's not for me. Like, and so, and again, it's like one of those things, like, you're not going to know about yourself until it happens. So
what did you learn about yourself?
I think that it was, again, like when you're boxing, or when I'm boxing, it was just so not personal. Like it was just like information. Like, I got hit and you're like, okay, I need to hit them more times than that. like you're just kind of like doing it's like chess. You're just like, okay, that happened, so I'm gonna go do this. Like, now I have to do this. And it wasn't like, and I think that part of it was like discovering that, I mean, it was very zen. It was very just like, I mean, I think that's where I learned so much about theater from it was, you know, we talk about in theater, like, oh, just be in the moment, where it's like, in boxing, it is absolutely critical to be in the moment. You know, if you are thinking one step ahead or reflecting, still caught up on what just happened, like, you are going to get punched in the face. Like, you are going to get hit. So it's very like it made me think about jazz, and it made me think about improvisation, you know, where you're just like, in it. And then in an incredible relationship too. I mean, I think I always have issues with like, I'm so heady and in my head and in my thoughts that deep training and the deep repetition of like the physical things that you're doing lends to a sensibility and a trust of your body to know
muscle memory.
Yeah, and knowing like it would be amazing. I remember watching some fight tapes and seeing like when I would duck when a punch was coming that I did not see, like that your body is just like knowing and rolling and doing these things. So it was like a really interesting revelation of that. And then a really incredible spiritual exercise, because I really had to like leave my, like in some ways be very present in my body, but also leave like for this event to happen, because it was so crazy to think, like to walk through all the fears of like, I remember my first fight, I was just like, what happens if I like get hit and I cry? What happens if I get punched in the stomach and I shit my pants? What happens if I, like you're all of this is in front of people that you're just like, so you take that idea in the theater of like risk and then you're like, oh no, this is like for real. This is for real. And it was just so insane. It was so insane. It was in so many ways the craziest thing I could think of to do. Like just absolutely insane. And
do you regret not stripping?
No. Not really. I mean, I think I mean, I actually know a lot of strippers and love them deeply and I'm a huge fan. And I don't think I would have been as good at that as I was at boxing. I think I was taken care of to find like, no, this is for you. That's not for you. You go this way. I mean, I do still think like, I mean, it's one of those things, like, I think in some probably alternative universe, I did strip and then that would have made me a different person, you know, like that would have revealed something as well. And I don't regret, I mean, but fundamentally, I believe that, that the boxing also grew out of the fact that I stopped acting, and that part of what happened with the acting was that I couldn't justify why it merited attention, you know, like that it was like, why is it important? Like I didn't know how to like make that moment like important and sacred. Like it really seemed dumb. Like I was like, oh, look at me, I'm acting. Like I did, like I couldn't like connect to the value of it. And it really took that like completely repressed performance desire that like, that's what was driving the boxing, was like, and it's kind of that's sad and unfortunate in its own way, where it's like, that's what it took to feel like I earned a place on that stage, was like, because I am willing to put this shit on the line to this extent, I deserve for you to look at me. Like, you fucking pay attention. So, and I think that, luckily, you know, today, that's not what it takes. I don't feel I have to risk physical injury every time to deserve the attention of humanity. You know?
Profound. How do you think boxing changed you?
I mean, I think that it really changed my perception of what I was capable of. Like that, I mean, I didn't ever see myself as an athlete. I didn't ever see myself as like, I'm a super strong person. But I think just kind of bringing that kind of focus and discipline and abandon. I mean, that, I mean, I think it really, in fact, opened up the possibility of who I am, you know, where I think a lot of times we maybe walk around with very small ideas of who we think we are and what we think we like. And then you realize, like, I have no idea. You're just like, oh my God, I could be anything. You know, I mean, it's really, but then again, I don't know. I mean, at the same time, it really was like, it also made me understand how comforting it is to label and rest inside of an identity. Because I think for a long time when I was boxing, it's like, I was a boxer. I was Julie the boxer. I was like, I mean, it really simplified certain things. Because,
and yet you were going to CalArts for
I know, but I mean,
directing.
I think I'm also like schizophrenic half the time, because it's like, it's weird, because it's part of the beauty of being in the moment is like, wherever you are, that's where you're at. But then it's also that forgetting too. I mean, that was a weird thing where, you know, after I graduated and I turned pro, it was like my whole world for a minute. And then when I retired, I mean, because I had issues where my muscles were fucking up because I didn't really take care of myself. So I had done this thing where I had overdeveloped my calves without stretching my tendons, because I never stretched and I never got a massage, and I did crazy like weight gain, weight loss things and all that stuff. And it was the signal was that my calves went into Charlie horse for 2.5 weeks and was incredibly painful. But it was that my calf muscles were ripping the tendons out of my feet, is what I was feeling, because I thought I had broken my heels somehow, because that's what it felt like, was like I'd step down and feel like I had broken heels. So
that's horribly painful.
Horribly painful. So I couldn't run because my calves would go into Charlie horse. So like my last fight, I just had to, for cardio, I had to just do like cycling and swimming. And I was undefeated as a professional. So it was like, I was like, it's not anything you want to do like halfway to be like, I don't want to lose. So, I mean, pretty much it just got too painful it was so painful. And then I, you know, took a break, and then, and I really had this, like, I was kind of at a loss for like, what am I supposed to do now? And that's,
you're like, I'll just get a PhD.
Yeah.
I'll just do that.
It's interesting because that's when I started the band, was when I had to take the break from boxing. And part of it was like, well, you know, part of boxing was like doing something I was utterly terrified of. Like it was also like the scariest thing I could think of to do was to fight in front of people. And then, it was funny because the next most terrifying thing I could think of to do was sing in front of people. So it was like, oh my God, and that's ridiculous. And
so are you saying you thought it was worse? In terms of fear factor?
Yeah, it was comparable. It was comparable to like the adrenal, like, you know, horror. Like it was like, it felt like it could be, because that was part of it, was like, how am I going to get my adrenal kicks now? Because I had also like stopped drinking and stopped doing drugs and all this. So it was like, well, how am I gonna get high now if I can't go, you know, box and like lose my mind that way? And so it's funny because my friend John Mouse, who also went to CalArts, like he and I had been hanging out, and he was the one, he was like, you need to play music. I was like, okay. And he gave me like this crappy broken guitar, and then it was like, and I was living next door to my best friend Lisa, and she was studying opera at PCC. And then the first thing I had done when I retired from boxing is I did a play, because it's funny because I did The Artist Way, because I was like, I don't know who I am anymore. And then I did The Artist Way, and I was like, oh right, I have a master's degree in directing, maybe I should do a play. So we did this play that I wrote about Don Quixote because I had read this work of philosophy by the Spanish philosopher Unamuno, who wrote this amazing book of philosophy called Our Lord Don Quixote, which is pretty much a chapter by chapter analysis of Don Quixote as if it was the Bible, and Don Quixote is who we should have followed as Jesus. It was like, this is the guy. And it's so good. And it was kind of like when you read, if you feel the way I feel, when you read Nietzsche and you're like, I'm sorry, this is philosophy? Like, this is insane. This is so crazy and great that you can just say these things and make this shit up about the world and man and whatever, like reality. I was like, philosophy is amazing. Because I think as a playwright and a person that lives a lot in questions, like, I don't know what anything's about. I had no idea what's going on. Like, the audacity of philosophical statements is so hysterical to me. Like, and it's something that feels like directing, where it's like, I'm gonna make a world because I said so. Like, because I say, I think, therefore I am. Boom. Like, that's what it's so, and so again, because it just seems so playful and so great that you can just say stuff like that. I just think it's absurd.
Do you feel like you have a need for control?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, I mean, I don't think that I do, but over time I've discovered how much I do. But I think what I've discovered, because I always was like, I'm not a controlling person, but I realize it's all inward. Like, all my control is like turned inward on like these little games that I'm doing with myself inside of myself, and how I feel. I'm like, how I feel I'm trying to keep myself contained, which is funny because, like, when I talk to people who are closest to me, I appear from the outside to be a very uncontained person. But it's one of those things, like, only I know, like, this is just a slight fraction of what I have going on in here. And that there is I think that there's a fear of what it would look like to truly be like, what it would look like if I truly like released the hounds of like my inner life. So I'm like, I don't entirely trust myself, I guess, is what I've discovered over the years. And so there are odd ways that it's like I'm curating like my own life and my own experience, I think. And it's something that I'm actively working on right now, is like how to let go of some of that and even further like release into trusting myself, trusting the world, you know.
You have trust issues? I do. That's why I ask.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm gonna come back to that, like going to a different school every year. Like, that was like a really strange realization that I had never put together, that's part of that, is that it instilled in me very early that relationships aren't permanent, people aren't always going to be there. So it's like, I have intimacy issues, I have trust issues, you know, it really manifests in my inner circle. It's interesting. Like, another thing that I realized about myself is that, like, and this probably has to do with control as well. I mean, most definitely does, actually, is the way, my favorite way of interacting with people is creating with them. I think that is how I like to mediate my relationships. So my longest term friendships are my artistic collaborators. You know, it's like Sean Buckles and I still make theater together, and we have been making theater together since Cal Arts consistently. He's been in nearly everything I've done. And it's like how I relate to people and what I consider to be like the right use of time. So it's weird because I feel somewhat like I've always felt somewhat excluded from like people who just hang out or just like, come over and let's just hang out. And I'm like, no, come over and let's make something. Like, come over and let's, like, we're going to make a song. We're going to make a piece. Let's work on something. Let's do, that it's a weird kind of like mediation of the relationship, but it's also, it was funny because Sean and Brian Tichenal, who's another CalArts person from a later class who I've been working with as well, they were explaining to me like the love languages, like the different, there's like the whole thing of like quality time or gifts or like what's your love language. That's
what my wife talks about a lot, but yeah, she mentions that.
Yeah, and I had never heard of it, and then they were kind of explaining it to me, and we had this like long conversation about it, and then I realized that, because the first thing, my reaction, it was like, well, it's not quality time, because like my husband will tell you, like, I never make time for things or whatever. But then at the end of the whole conversation, I was like, no, it is quality time. It's just that my version of quality time is making shit with people. Like, That's what I want to do. Like, that's how I see you. I feel seen. And that's something I'm grappling with now, is like, maybe that's evasive in terms of maybe it's controlling and not being intimate. But for me, it's like looking at people's art is some of the most intimate shit. It's like, let me see how you think and how you feel and how you express that in a really, like, let me see, let's see what we make together. And it's also it's a funny, I find it like an acceptable form of polyamory, where it's like, I get to make art babies with all kinds of people, and it's not as disruptive as if I was like sleeping with everybody.
So I want to, it's one of the themes of this podcast is finding that balance, or finding that line of creativity and destructiveness. Where does one person go one way and go another way? Do you feel like some type of battle within yourself about that line? Because you said before, you don't know what you're capable of, right?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have. Like, it's so funny. I have this very clear, speaking of moments and feelings we remember, I have this very clear, like, sitting on the toilet revelation of like how much of my thought, time, and energy was wasted. And this is prior to being married, but how much of it was wasted in like thinking about boys. Like, I was like, oh my God. And it was just like an economy of thought and time and energy, where and there does seem to be, there was a moment that shifted for me in part of my like maturation as an artist, where I realized, like, previously there was really no division between like my art and my life. And my life was super dramatic, and it was super like, and there was heartbreak, and there was self-destructive behavior, and there was drugs, and there was, and it was really like trying to put it all in there, and it was, and it was kind of like a attempt at generating something. But again, it's kind of back to like the actors on stage, and they're feeling super jazzed, but like nothing's happening out there, It's like it was just, I was churning up all this shit, but wasn't producing it, and wasn't producing like what I wanted to produce. And it was that thing where I was like, I would like to have the drama be in my work. Not in my fucking life. Like, I don't need to do that. And I really, there's different models, and I used to love the painter Miro, because Miro, kind of as opposed to Salvador Dali or some of the more like far out people, was like a real straight dude, like he wasn't excessive, he wasn't whatever. and he was just, you know, he was married, he had a long-term relationship, but his painting studio, he had a little sign over the door of his painting studio that said, "Through these doors I go mad." And it was like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. It's like, I don't need all this drama in my life. I just want to like give it to the work and be able to kind of focus from that place. And and I have moments where it's like, you know, you find yourself craving some more drama in your life sometimes, but there really was a turn of realizing like the self-destructiveness and the like personal, you know, stuff wasn't getting the results that I wanted. It was like, this isn't leading to higher revelations or anything like that. And so it's strange because it's like, as my life has gotten more peaceful in many ways, my work has gotten so much crazier. It's so much crazier.
That makes sense to me.
Right? That you're like, because it feels like a economy of something where you're just like, oh yeah, you took it from here and now it's like, now it gets to flow that way. You know, it's like a clogged sewer or something where it was like, oh right, we need this to go over here. And yeah, so I mean, so it's interesting because I think, again, because there's that difference too, is because I don't, like, I had a really transformative time. For 2 years, I was the June Carter in a Johnny Cash tribute band. Speaking of Blind Man in Black, so I got to tour for 2 years with this, like, you know, acclaimed Johnny Cash tribute band, and it was a transformative time for my music and the band as well, because it was having the opportunity to sing songs that weren't mine. And to somewhat, it wasn't like a show where I'm like, I'm June Carter. Like, I was myself. I was like, I'm Juli Crockett, blah, blah, blah. but it was, you know, it was inhabiting like the spirit of like who she was. And she was a brazen, funny, you know, bold, out there girl who wasn't the greatest singer, who wasn't but she was like a performer and an entertainer. And I mean, fucking June Carter, like, icon. So what it allowed me to do, and the revelation I had doing that, and I think it's tied to boxing too, was to not take myself personally. Like, to be like, it created that, back to the Brechtian thing, like that little bit of distance between me as performer and the performance, you know, to be like, oh, right. And it's a weird thing. And then I was able to bring that back to performing my own songs, because before, performing my own songs was like not wearing any skin. It was like, oh my God, like, this is too personal, and and I'm gonna be judged, and oh God, and what is it? And it was like the non-separation between self and art, you know, and just having like a slight bit of wind between those two things allows me so much more freedom in my art, because I don't have to take it personally. It's like, it's not me. Like, that's not me. That's like the thing that's come. It's like if you looked at your own poop and were like, that's me, you know, it's like, I've lost myself. You're like, no, this is just what I'm making. This is just like the carbon dioxide coming out of me. It's like the sweat coming out of my body. Like, I don't have to take these things personally, you know. I don't have to treat them like it's nature. It's nature as an artist. I'm gonna make stuff. It's gonna and letting it be what it is, and not like, you know, it's a weird thing. And that kind of spaciousness has allowed me to like go so much farther with like finding my voice or whatever, because it's like, it's not my voice. It's like, it's the thing that came out of me that day. And you're like, holy shit, like, that's crazy. That's crazy what came out of me today.
And some beautiful things have come out of you. I've listened to your music. It's wonderful. And everybody listening, please listen to Evangenitals. Really beautiful stuff. I know we're probably running short on time.
Yeah.
But I mean, we haven't even talked about the fact that you and I connected with each other at the AVN Adult Expo in Las Vegas in 2006. So
Life is so absurd.
I know. And we'll have to, I'd love to do a part 2 if you have time. I mean, this has been so poetically beautiful, this conversation. I am so grateful. But before we disconnect, what's going on with the Evangenitals?
Well, I mean, it's funny because we had been working on all this music because we released we did our Moby Dick album in, it's like 2014 is the last time we officially released an album. And I mean, and part of that is just the music industry is crazy, and why would you release an album? And now in the pandemic, it's like, who knows? But so I had this idea, because our band is so weird. We're so weird, and we're all over the place. And people are like, well, what kind of music do you play? And you're just like, all of it? I don't know. And so as with most things with the band, it started as a joke, is we had such a backlog of music, because when we play our catalog is so deep. And so much of it is not represented and hasn't ever been released in recorded form. So we had started, working on recording all this music. And then I made this joke about, I wanted to release an album called the 100-song demo, which would be, when people are like, what kind of music do you play? And you're like, well, you can listen to my demo, and it's 100 songs long. To be like, here you go, here's our demo. So we started working on that. So we had this tremendous backlog of music that was unreleased. And actually, a while back, we went on the Melissa Etheridge cruise, and we released like a special cruise album for that we never officially released. So we have all this music. So one of my pandemic hobby now has been that I started making music videos for these songs. And it started
wait, just to clarify, you were opening for Melissa Etheridge, right?
Well, sort of. She has a cruise that she does. Well, one, totally surreal. So through my job in the cannabis industry, I got introduced to Melissa
Holy
Etheridge.
shit, we didn't even touch on that.
I know. Right. It's like, there's too much life. We need a part 2. So I had met Melissa through my job, and then she discovered my band, and then she came and saw us at Pappy and Harriet's, and then she invited us on her cruise. So she does these, I mean, it was an annual cruise. It didn't happen this year because of the pandemic. But we've become friends, which is super great and surreal to be like, Melissa, we like text each other jokes and stuff. And
has she ever sung Come to My Window?
Has she ever sung it?
To you?
Oh, to me personally? Well, I mean, I've been there while she sang it.
Okay.
Not just hanging out. We don't just hang out and she starts singing it. But it's funny because we've like spoken on cannabis industry things together. I actually am on the board of her. Her son recently died of an opioid overdose.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes, it was.
That's sad.
Super brutal. This is during the pandemic. I mean, it had been a struggle for a long time. So in the wake of that, she has started the Etheridge Foundation, which is to raise money and give money for the research for alternatives to opioids, pretty much. So that's kind of how she has sublimated that experience, is in starting a foundation, and I'm on the board of her foundation. And she's also been doing amazing. She started this whole like Etheridge TV thing. She's doing like live performances 5 days a week out of her garage in a 7-camera setup. Because her wife, Linda Whalem, who's the creator of Nurse Jackie, like is the whole TV film person. So they've like created this amazing thing. So again, like a lot of her response to this event has been like through the healing power of music and communicating and performing and just like sharing and expressing through the whole experience, which is super trippy. But point being, we were on her cruise. So her cruise is amazing. It's like a floating country run by Melissa Etheridge, and it kind of was the most surreal, positive. I mean, when you talk about like matriarchal society, I called it like the blueprint for the matriarchy, because one, the cruise was like 96% women or something like. I mean, it was huge. You know, and it was funny because the dudes, and we joked that like my band was most of the guys on the cruise because there's a lot of people in my band, and they were and my husband was commenting like how odd it was, or just what a different experience it was, where every important decision, every conversation about anything that mattered was happening between women. It was like women were in charge of fucking everything, because it's all pretty much like women led bands. So, but there's like 26 bands that she personally selects to go on her cruises. So we got to go on her cruise and perform, and I got to perform with her. They did like an 80s night. I got to do a Prince cover with her, and it was completely ludicrous. So it was such a fun experience. It's kind of like that, and going to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival are like my two pinnacle like models of where it's like it's like being in a country of its own, that art is the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
Where it's like, this is the main form of currency, is performing with people, collaborating with people, sharing your work. I was like, this should be the model of like I want our wars to be fought as like biennales. You know, like I was like, can we just do that? Like be like, our art is better than yours. Like, where good. See,
another song title right there.
Yeah, the World War Biennale. Yeah, right. No, it's but yeah, so we had all this unreleased music, and I started making videos for it, and that has been my pandemic like discovery is which is great too, because it's breaking through a lot of fear. Like I was a kid too where I didn't have money, so I went into theater, even though I was a lover of cinema and film, because I was like, film is for rich people and I don't have all this money to make movies, and you know, the technology and and it's something I've been like avoidant of for a long time, and then suddenly in pandemic, I was like, I want to make this stop motion piece, and I made like a stop motion music video for one of our songs, and it was awesome. And then I made another video out of all public domain footage where I just like dove into hardcore editing. It was like made an entire crazy video.
Are you editing it yourself?
Yeah. And then I just made another one for a friend, my friend, Goodnight Cody, who's in our band, but he also has his own project. He just released a video for his new EP where I actually like filmed, like shot footage and made this whole thing and edited it. And then there's another video we're about to release that's like a green screen in public domain footage one. So I'm just like having a ball, suddenly being like, oh my God, like I can make all kinds of things. Like, so that's,
you're having a COVID ball.
I'm having a COVID ball. Yeah. It's like I have, and I was joking with somebody, is I think part of what happened is that like the pandemic, with the collapse of, you know, so much of the entertainment industry, it lowered production value, you know, like where it's like suddenly, you know, people are doing the TV shows from home and everybody's on Zoom, and that becomes an acceptable aesthetic. Mm-hmm. So it was like, it lowered production value enough for my like perfectionism to be like, I can get in there. Like I was like, ah! So I kind of like dove in, where suddenly there was a window where I didn't feel so much self-judgment about like, oh, well, if I'm going to make a video, it needs to be like this or like that, or I need this or that. Like, I mean, that again, back to our original thing of like the introspection of the pandemic, is it's given me the opportunity to really listen to the excuses that I tell myself as to why I'm not doing things, you know, and hearing and becoming exhausted by my own bullshit. By my own stories I'm telling myself, or the excuses that I'm making. And I was like, I cannot listen to this anymore. Like, I just need to do the thing that I want to do. And part back to that, like, preciousness of life, is I really think that, you know, so much of the call that I'm feeling is just to make work, like just to get it out. So it's kind of like whatever is blocking that flow has got to go. You know, it's got to go. I can't handle it anymore. Gotta go.
So how can we find you? Where do we find you?
Well, I mean, the Evangenitals has a website and all that stuff, and I have I mean, I'm on the social medias.
All of them.
All of them. I mean, that's the funniest thing too. Like, I've been on social media since Friendster. You know, like, if you go back, like, we joke about the fact, like, the Evangenitals and myself personally were on Friendster and Tribe and MySpace and Facebook and Instagram, and you know, it's like, oh my god, this has been such a road of like social media. So I mean, it's insane because we're everywhere, but you know, it's like we're on Spotify and YouTube. Like, all the videos are on YouTube. And yeah, so the Evangenitals YouTube is good. And Instagram. I mean, it's so funny because I'm always like wanting to get off of social media, but then it's become as ubiquitous as email, you know, where it's like that's the biggest problem with like getting off of Facebook, is you realize like I use it like email. And then you really trip out because you realize like Google is no better and my Gmail is pretty much the same fucking thing. I'm like, oh, so that's why I have been writing a lot of postcards to people, like in my like I started that about a year ago, just as this desire to be like offline, you know, writing and connecting. So
my wife is doing that too. Yeah.
It's
Are you
really,
enjoying it?
I fucking love it. I love it. And I mean, and one, as a writer, artist person, it's like, I mean, some person wrote me after they got my postcard and they were like, are you on drugs? Like, what? Because you never know what you're going to get. Because sometimes it's just like a stream of consciousness free write of like, hey, blah, blah, blah. You know, because it's, I mean, because I kind of do them in bursts, and I've put up on our social media, both personally and for the band, where I'll be like, send me your address and I'll send you a postcard. So I've sent hundreds and hundreds of postcards to people. And then it's amazing, because I was thinking about that this morning, where it's like, you know, how do you define success? You know, and is it money? Is it this? And like, you know, a random person who is a fan of the band, who sent me their address, you know, months ago, because sometimes it takes me a while to get through my list. And she's a girl somewhere in the world who is on social media. I mean, I don't know her, but I sent her this postcard, and then she just wrote me back, and it was one of those things where she was like, I was like having the worst week of my life and completely suicidal, and I got your postcard and now I feel better. And you're just like, fuck yeah. Like, well, that's great. Like, hell yeah.
And there was no electricity involved, really.
No. Yeah. There was like, you know, some weird superhero postcard and like, you know, a Bugs Bunny stamp and some random stream of consciousness thing. And it's always interesting. Like, that's the stuff where, and this is just like a person who I find compelling and beautiful and interesting in the little snippets, you know, that she shares. And I know she has mental health problems, and I know she has problems with depression. but and I don't know her, you know, but it's like incredible. It's incredible just like how easy it is to just connect with people.
Yeah, and the handwriting is so personal, you know. That's the one thing that we lose in our digital landscape is
Yeah.
the personalized live nature of handwriting. It's you're literally touching something that is another person's, like, you know, essence.
It's how I feel about books too. It's like why I love physical book. Like I can't read on the internet, but there is something like so unbelievably thrilling. And it's so funny that it's like so old school for our time now to get like a physical piece of mail from somebody that's real, that has handwriting, that isn't like a form letter or some generated thing. And I think, you know, again, it's just the fact that because it contains like time and effort, you know. It's funny, I was joking with my husband the other day because he was playing me this piece of computer music that was like a synth patch, and he was like, it's like a half an hour long, and I got so mad because I was like, there's a fundamental like algorithm in me that it's like, if you didn't put at least as much time and effort into making the fucking thing as I have to spend listening to it, I'm going to be mad. Like, I'm going to be mad. Like, you don't get to just like put the computer on loop for 30 minutes and then expect me to listen to it for 30 minutes. Like, I was like, no. Like, and that's kind of my relationship with the work that I see and the theater that I see. It's like, and that's what he was joking, like there should be some algorithm, like it's like the piece, you should have invested like 9/10 of the energy at least in making it that I'm gonna spend watching it. Because I need to know that you are like working for this, you know, that you respect my time, you know, and my attention, and that's like, and for me, that's like part of the feeling of I mean, I describe it as love when I'm making a piece of work, is like I realize that I can take people to some super far out places if they feel like that I'm invested, like that I'm like that I'm really taking care of them, like that I have worked. This is thoughtful. Like this is thoughtful. I am present. You know, I'm not just like, bleh, you know, like that kind of work irritates me so much if I suspect that you are being, I don't know what is it, not thoughtful. It's like, I'm like, it makes me very upset when I suspect that I'm like,
what was the outcome of that?
What outcome of what? Of me
with your husband? Was it like,
we just laughed. Yeah.
Oh,
okay. I'm like, no, I'm not listening to that. That's crazy. No, and it's fine because some of it is like very enjoyable, but it is, I mean, that's one of the joys of my husband and I's relationship is we are very, very different, very different people. And there's a lot of yin and yang in that relationship.
Well, I want to hear about it. Are you up for a part 2?
I'm totally down for a part 2. Yeah.
Okay. This has been a beautiful, poetic, intense, awesome conversation. And I am so grateful that you were able to be here and spend some time with me and us. And I love you. You're awesome. So,
thanks.
And yeah, I feel like our next conversation, you're going to be like, yeah, and very just matter of fact, that you're just gonna be like, yeah, we're going to do some theater on Mars next year. That's the plan.
Totally. That's quite possible.
I feel like that's not too far away from reality.
No, it's funny because I don't know if I don't know how much I can say about it, but Sean Buckholz did just visit Elon Musk's
Holy shit.
facility.
Holy shit. This is happening.
So you may be intuiting something totally legit.
Well, we have an exclusive.
Yeah.
Theater on Mars.
Coming soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we're going to have an awkward ending, and
Yeah.
then we'll have another awkward beginning the next time we
I
reconnect.
love it. Lean in. Lean
All
into
right,
the
here we go.
awkwardness.
All
All
right.
right. Bye.
Okay, well, here we go.
Something's happening. Yeah.
There we go. I found it. All right.